All right, just in time.
Thanks.
All right, everyone, I'd like to call this meeting to order. Welcome to the special meeting on Tuesday evening, January 19th. Madam Clerk, could you call roll?
With pleasure, Mayor. Councilmember Gothos?
Here.
Councilmember Pappen?
Here.
Councilmember Lee?
Here.
Deputy Mayor Bonilla?
Here.
Mayor Rodriguez?
Here. Great, okay, just a housekeeping announcement. Due to health orders in place at this time, we are holding meetings remotely. That should not be a surprise. Information on how to provide public comment is explained at the bottom of each published agenda. When public comment is announced for the item you wish to comment on, when signed into Zoom, use the raise your hand function and you will be called upon at the appropriate time. If you're calling via phone, press *9 to raise your hand. And when you're called upon, press *6 to unmute. And these options for public comment will remain available until I close the public comment period for that specific item. Okay, we have several items on the agenda for this special meeting. And we'll start with item number 1, State Route 92, State Route 82 El Camino Real Interchange Landscape Improvement Project. And I believe we have a presentation from Assistant Engineer Ms. Cadiz. We also have Kathy Zamet, Engineering Manager.
Hi, good evening. Let me see if I can share screen appropriately to start the presentation. That doesn't seem to be the right one. Share screen 2, okay. All right, please let me know when you can see the opening page of the presentation.
See it? Got it.
Okay, great. Let me just open the other screen. Sorry, I'm trying to find
no worries.
I've got to find the other screen with the notes on it. Okay. I'm so sorry. I'm just trying to find, there should be 2 screens. I'm going to stop sharing for a minute again, just to see if I can get this to work correctly. Okay. That's there. Share screen. Number 2. Share. Okay, I think that will work. All right, well, good evening, Honorable Mayor and Council members. I'm Kathy Zamet, Engineering Manager with Public Works Department. I'm here this evening with Mr. Chuck Gardala, who is from Gates and Associates, who is our landscape architect for the project. And we're here this evening to give you a presentation on the proposed landscaping concept for the interchange at 8292 interchange, and to request feedback, give an opportunity for council feedback, and also for public comment. So I will begin with that. This is our agenda this evening. And basically, we've been progressing this design for a while, and we've had a public outreach program, which I will be explaining, that tried to give lots of opportunities for people to give us their opinions on what they'd like to see when we landscape this interchange. So the design has been progressing, and it's not entirely final. This is the concept, but what we are hoping is that after we get feedback this evening, that that will kind of wrap it up, and then we'll be able to move forward with the design. And that is in order to help us stay on schedule so that we can try to advertise this work for construction in the fall of 2021, which is good for landscaping, and then get this completed in 2022. So the project location is at the El Camino Real State Route 92 interchange. The work is entirely within the state right-of-way, with the exception, and I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, but we are also proposing landscaping to give a shield for the sound wall, which is on kind of the northeast quadrant of the interchange. And this is the large sound wall that faces the neighborhood. So this project does include landscaping to provide some visual screening of that sound wall. So the roadway project was completed in 2018, and we'd like to complete the landscaping in 2022. And at this time, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Chuck so that he can walk you through the details of the project constraints and the landscape concepts, and go over those details with you. So then I'm going to be moving these forward. Chuck, you let me know when you are ready. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Oh dear, I'm sorry. I need to talk about public outreach first. I apologize. We took a multi-pronged approach for the public outreach. And one of the big things we did was a survey online, and it had many questions to solicit public feedback on what they'd like to see. So what kinds of trees are they interested in? What kinds of plants? Do they like color, et cetera? So this was a big way to reach people. This survey was launched in September, closed in October. We had 200 people click on the survey link, and 173 of them actually completed the survey. This survey was open to the general public, but one of the survey questions asked respondents to identify which neighborhood they lived in, so that we could gain some analytics to get a feel for, was there a difference between the people who lived in the local neighborhood and the opinions of the people who were driving through the interchange. But the survey responses helped to guide the content for our new project webpage, which is now available as of November, and is also guiding our work on the design. We did utilize all the different social media channels that are common for the city's practices now, and the city e-newsletter in order to get the word out to people. We also mailed postcards to the surrounding area, which was trying to focus on the area that's kind of in the vicinity of the project. And there it is. This is the area that we did the actual direct mailers to. And those let people know about the presentation that was coming up that we did in December at the Sustainability and Infrastructure Commission meeting, so that they'd also have an opportunity to participate at that meeting. We also, staff also made hand-delivered postcards to some of the businesses in the area to make sure that they were receiving it. Let's see. And so we've also sent out reminders for this meeting earlier in the month to let people know that it's coming. And from the analytics collected, it tells us that most of the people coming to our project page are coming directly via the link, which suggests that they entered the link manually instead of clicking on a link. And second was from the search engine. So this means that most people visited the page via a mailer or heard about the project and then got the link and went directly to it. So since we've launched the web page, we've also had 122 visitors, mostly in November and December, who did come to take a look at the project and the details. And we're going to continue to use the webpage as a source of information and social media as one of our key outreach tools as the project goes on. And now I will hand it over to Chuck. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Good evening, Mayor, council members. So as part of that outreach process, some of the design constraints and criteria we started looking at for this project was looking at the reality of the Caltrans standards. There's a lot of regulations regarding sight lines and visibility, and the maintenance realities too, with Caltrans maintaining this interchange itself. The area of the sound wall that is abutting the residential neighborhood that Kathy mentioned, that would be maintained by the city. But the rest of the interchange would be maintained by Caltrans. So some of the elements we put together as part of the outreach process, we're looking at California natives that are drought tolerant, low maintenance, resistant to fire, and also looking at maintaining some of the existing stormwater treatment that is currently within the interchange and swales. The issues of graffiti on the sound wall was also of concern. And some of the feedback we heard back from the community as well is to maintain the visibility for drivers who are merging on the freeway, providing clear vehicle recovery zones and maintaining those sight lines for vehicular traffic. Next slide. So from the public survey, a lot of the information we gathered, there was a lot of feedback regarding using California drought tolerant natives within the interchange, having a minimal planting design, avoiding hazards for trespassing, and then allowing for adequate budget for maintenance within the interchange as well. And then the site visibility, low profile plants, that was another element that was discussed within the feedback. So a lot of the community feedback is the colorful flowers. We had the coast live oak. Originally, we had a Platanus racemosa, which was a California native London plane tree, and then the eastern redbud. And those were based on a number of different options that were provided in the community outreach process. Next slide. And based on the feedback, we consolidated everything from the community and then also met with city maintenance staff. And we had made some adjustments to the plant palette based on that feedback. And some of it originally, the screen tree that is on the left side, the California incense cedar, that was originally thought of to be possibly a redwood. But the feedback we received was, well, we want drought tolerant, and redwoods are not a drought tolerant plant. So we looked at alternatives that used significantly less water and that were able to provide the same screening and aesthetic for the sound wall area. We looked at switching it from an eastern redbud to a western redbud based on some feedback from city maintenance staff. And we had the two oak trees within the interchange itself, the coast live oak and the valley oak, which is listed as a native to the San Mateo County region as well. And the street tree we had modified from the Platanus racemosa, which was more of a riparian tree, to the London plane tree bloodgood variety, which is more tolerant of drought conditions and less maintenance. And that was also directly based on direct feedback from city maintenance staff as well. Next slide. And then regarding the plant material, so we've worked with Caltrans quite a bit on other interchange projects. And we're looking at low growing ground covers to be massed within the interchange. So some of the large specimen shrubs that we're proposing here do perform well within this area. We had manzanita, ceanothus, a smoke bush, and toyon. And for the grass and perennials, we had the rock rose, a California fuchsia, a sage, and a deer grass. And then for the evergreen ground covers, we were looking for a low growing emerald carpet manzanita, the dwarf coyote bush and another type of ceanothus ground cover as well. So those plants, along with the trees, make up the plant palette that we'll be discussing on the next page here. So here we have a site plan. We have El Camino Real running north-south on the page with 92 running east-west. We'll start on the northeast quadrant is where the existing sound wall is. And so on the off-ramp there's the sound wall between the off-ramp and the residential neighborhood there between 18th Street and Ivy Street. And there we have the incense cedar trees along that zone. You see the red item that's highlighted in C. We'll get into the perspectives that we created. So we have some renderings for that area as well. As we exit the freeway, we land at El Camino Real. We have some color planting and color trees to accent that intersection. And we're retaining a number of the existing trees that are out there that are left over from construction. So we're not removing any of additional trees on site. We will be infilling the main quadrants of the interchange with oak trees. So those will be a mix of the Quercus agrifolia and the valley oak as well. As we move across El Camino Real and we head to the northwest side of the interchange, again, we have the incense cedar trees, and those are spaced further apart to allow for visual access to the retail and the signage on the buildings there. So they allow the visual cues from drivers, so we're not blocking any of that retail signage along that perimeter. Within the quadrants, you'll see a kind of a gray swoosh. Those would be areas of decorative cobble, and they allow for maintenance staff to easily access through these areas and provide low visual access, from the interchange as people are merging onto the freeway. They can easily look over their shoulder to see the freeway traffic. As we move to the south side of the freeway where the red A is, we have a rendering that will show that area as well with the same types of low ground covers and low cobble zones there. And then as we move back to El Camino Real, running north-south, we have the street trees, which are the blood-good London plane trees that were flanking each side of this existing sidewalk going up on both sides of the overpass there. And finally, on the right side, on the southeast quadrant, very similar to the north, we have the interchange that's accented with low color trees and shrubs. And then we also have the oak trees that are filling in the rest of that quadrant. So if we go to the next slide, we'll start with slide A. So here we have a rendering. This is looking towards the east as the off-ramp is just to the right on this photo. And we have the coast live oak and valley oak trees within their interchange, the decorative cobble bands, some of the existing native trees to remain, large specimen shrubs throughout, and then low evergreen ground cover that accent the rest of that ground plane within the interchange. Next slide. And here's a rendering as we look, I believe, this is looking southbound towards the freeway. We have the off-ramp on the left. And so this is depicting kind of what the established landscape aesthetic would be, with the color accent trees of the Western redwoods flanking each side of the El Camino Real with low color planting in front of it. We have the platanus bloodgood Linden Plain street trees that are within the sidewalk area as well. And then beyond where you can't really see, there's decorative gravel and low ground covers there. We want to keep a lot of that landscaping very low to the ground. So there's always visual access from any passerby. So you can actually see into the entire interchange area. So there's no hiding spots created. And click to the next slide. And so here was, this is the existing conditions of the existing sound wall on that northeast quadrant that abuts that residential neighborhood. And so we did provide some different options to the community and different renderings that you see on the right side there, option A and option B. And overwhelming response by the neighbors was for option B, which kind of showed the redwood trees along with a vine attached to that wall. And as we develop that further, we go to the next slide. We came up with the final rendering for that sound wall piece as well. So here we had a creeping fig, which is a proven Caltrans vine for sound walls. It attaches to pretty much anything. It's very low maintenance, and it provides that graffiti control to that sound wall as well. And so we would place those on the sound wall. They would grow up and eventually envelop the entire wall. And then we have California incense cedars as well placed in there to provide some more vertical screening along that facade. And there are a few existing trees within that area as well that would remain. So that pretty much wraps up the landscaping presentation and the graphics and the imagery.
Thank you, Chuck. Oops. So going forward, again, what we'd like to do this evening is just hear any comments from the council, any questions and any public comments, which we will then consider as in our repertoire of comments as we wrap up this design concept. And then after this evening, we'd like to move into the design phase. We expect that to take approximately 9 months, and then look to advertise and award the project toward the fall, and then complete that project by the fall of 2022. So that really wraps up what we'd like to share with you. But at this time, we're open to receive comments and questions.
Great, thank you very much for that presentation. Are there any questions from council?
I have a question.
Please.
The design looks wonderful, and I was really happy to see all the efforts to put in native California plants and consider the ongoing maintenance costs. And I wanted to also ask about the discontinuation of Roundup and how that might have been factored into the design and the maintenance plan. So where, our city was, was a leader in limiting and eliminating our use of Roundup. And so this is a great opportunity to design around that policy. And so I'm curious to hear how that has been factored in.
Well, all of the maintenance within the Caltrans right-of-way will be conducted by Caltrans following their standards. And I anticipate they would be following the same approach to how they conduct their maintenance. And again, the portion on the northeastern quadrant will be maintained by the city, and that is limited to the vines and the trees. That area is actually a city-owned parcel that is used occasionally for some storage. So there's not a lot of activity there, but it is an area that we do want to keep accessible. And Chuck, do you have anything that you would like to add about the design related to the question?
Yeah, for the use of Roundup, we've tried to push that issue with Caltrans in the past and have been unsuccessful. It is one of their standard policies that they do use those type of chemicals to maintain their facilities. Within this area, because of the mass planting, the hope is that the weeds become suppressed by the plant material. And so there would be limited weeds available. But I think within the city property, that is easily accomplished.
Thank you.
Councilmember Pappen.
I've got 3 questions. The first is, actually I have 4 questions. The first is, in the center between 92 headed west and 92 headed east, there's sort of a wall and then looks like a bunch of weeds, speaking of weeds. So whose responsibility is it to maintain that, and what will become of that?
I believe you're speaking about underneath the bridge structure, the bridge abutment walls.
I think so, Kathy. I think so.
Okay. Well, Chuck, can you confirm whether the street trees actually continue over in that area, or if they're just on the outsides of the bridge? And oh, sorry, go ahead.
They are just on the outsides of the bridge structure.
Okay. Councilmember Pappen, I'll need to confirm for you the exact limits of the maintenance. We are working on a maintenance agreement with Caltrans. The city will be maintaining the street trees, and we are also maintaining the street lighting. So I will need to ask specifically about anything that is on that structure. I would anticipate that anything that's on the abutment would be growing, not intentionally planted there, but growing from the adjacent landscaping, and that may be covered by Caltrans, but I will look into that for you.
I don't know if we're talking about the same thing. So I'm talking about, let me just see if I can get it for you. It's called Perspective A on your slides. Are we talking about the same thing? I'm talking about Perspective A looks so nice. And when I look to the left part of the screen, if I were to be heading east, center divide, it has a bunch of weeds. Sorry, I wasn't clear.
Okay. Let me see here if I can.
But I was going to get at the other part, by the way. So I'll come back to that. I'll come back to that in a second.
It's between east and westbound 92.
Right.
Okay, let me see if I can get this to.
Yeah.
Okay. So the wall, for example, on the far right.
No, I'm talking about
on the left, where the K rail is between east and westbound 92. That weedy area there.
Okay. That is within the state right of way, so that would be maintained by Caltrans.
And will it be maintained? It doesn't look particularly maintained at this moment in time.
No, those areas in general are very, very difficult for Caltrans to maintain. It's the traffic safety related to it. They have to shut down a lane of the freeway to access those zones. So Caltrans has really been pushing away from any median landscape in general through the state. So there's areas where, for instance, on I-80 on the way to Davis, that used to be solid oleanders, for years. And they've really been pushing to remove a lot of that landscape out of medians just because of the challenges they have with traffic safety. Those areas here where there, it is weeds, those are something where Caltrans could look, and it may be something we propose is what we call inert landscaping, is just cobble or gravel to at least suppress the weeds, so you don't get that aesthetic of just unmaintained vegetation growth. So that is an option. I mean, we can look at.
Okay, great. Okay, so as you're heading west on 92 and you exit to El Camino, the area where you're going to put the conical shaped, I forget what they're called, just a moment. Your incense cedar trees and then the fig. So I have a question. Will those cedar trees grow above the wall?
Eventually, yes.
Okay. Because it's really, I mean, both entrances into our city, the reason why I'm asking is because both entrances into the city, the first thing you're confronted with is a pretty unsightly sound wall. So I was just wondering what could be done. Now, the fact that those trees will grow above the sound wall, that's nice because you'll see some green. I guess my question is, would the climbing fig be allowed to grow over the wall so that we see green? This is on the, where you exit onto, as you're heading west, you exit on Del Camino.
Yeah.
Yes, usually that will have to be specified within the maintenance agreement. Something we're currently doing on another Caltrans project right now is we are planting vines on the Caltrans right away and actually coring little holes through the sound wall. It's a pretty standard Caltrans detail, and it lets the vines grow through the sound wall as well and screen the other side as well. Again, the challenge here, and this will have to be a discussion with Caltrans, is the actual maintenance and the safety related to that. Being on the off-ramp, it's a little easier than within the main travel way. But we can have that discussion with them.
That'd be great. And I don't know about the other side then, as you're heading east and you exit off El Camino. You don't have anything that could accommodate growth over there, if I'm correct.
Correct.
Okay. All right. And then I just was curious, I mean, it seems these are pretty detailed in the presentation here. And I was just wondering, why would the design take so long after that?
Well, this is the concept of what we want the landscaping to look like, but there's actually several steps involved, including some grading work, installing irrigation, and the controllers for the irrigation. And then there's plant establishment, and then all the specifications for the different soil treatments and so forth. And Chuck, you can add to that if you'd like, but it's basically designing a full plan set that you would need to go out and do all the preparatory work. And then the planting is the pretty part that you know, we'll have specifications and comes after, and there will be a plant establishment, which I believe is 2 years on this, 2 or 3 years.
Okay, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Deputy Member or Deputy Mayor Bonilla, please.
Thank you. I have 2 questions. First, I'd like to follow up on Diane's questions regarding the sound wall as you exit, where C is on the traffic side, which she was asking about vines possibly being there. But if you look over where A is and you look at perspective A, you will see that on the right-hand side of perspective A, there is also a sound wall there.
Yes.
And so I guess the question there is, could we get some planting along that sound wall too, to also discourage graffiti, which I saw as one of the great bonuses to having the fig climbing on the wall there. I think that's one thing we'd like to ask about.
Okay, well, when we looked at that area, there's really not much opportunity as far as any space on the interchange side. We can revisit to see if there is any space owned by Caltrans that we might be able to see if they'd be willing to allow us to put vines. But really the space is pretty limited there.
Yeah,
we can certainly look into that.
If we can look into it, that's all I can ask. Thank you. My other question has to do with, if you look at the site plan and you see perspective B, can we look at perspective B, please?
Yes.
So on perspective B, on both the left side where you see the light pole and the light poles, 2 light poles there. And on the right-hand side, you'll see there's the space between jacks and the actual ramp there. Both of those, well, the space on the left doesn't seem to have any plan. It's continually a mess. Okay, all sorts of junk gets over there. It's not a good scene over there. And I see that on C, when I look at the site plan, I don't really see anything specified for that area. If I look at the right-hand side of perspective B, where Jack's is, it looks like it shows some ground cover and some trees and a lot of things on the right side of the photo there, the space between Jack's and the ramp. There are 2 other areas at the south end, if you look at the site map, on both sides as you're exiting from eastbound 92 to go to El Camino. On the right-hand side there's an undeveloped area. And across El Camino, where you exit northbound El Camino to go to eastbound 92, there's also a little area there, which we don't have a picture of or perspective. But I'm wondering about those 4 areas. Is there, in fact, actually proposed landscaping near Jack's there? And what about the other 3 areas?
Yeah, so we would infill the landscaping to the maximum extent within the Caltrans right-of-way of those areas. So the little sliver there, I see which one you're talking about on the plan view. There's some little spaces that are available that we can landscape and include that as well. Yeah.
Okay, good. That's nice. Thank you. Those are my questions.
Okay, anything, Councilmember Goethals? All right, I'm going to open up public comment. And Madam Clerk, do we have anybody that would wish to comment on this item?
I do not have any raised hands at this time.
All right, I will close public comment and bring it back to council and for any final comments.
Just one from me, Eric. Diane earlier was mentioning the area between the east and west 92, but at some point Kathy spoke about the area underneath of the bridges on El Camino where we have walls. And I was wondering what, if anything, are we doing to discourage graffiti on those wall areas, on the bridge abutments?
With this particular project, I do not believe we have any proposed landscaping underneath, but that is something that we can talk to Caltrans about and see if there's any way to extend vines underneath that area as well, if that's desired.
Well, it doesn't have to be landscape. It would just be some way of discouraging graffiti or making it manageable, one or the other. So that's all. And my comments are, I like it. It's great. And I don't like the 9-month design period. Can we compress that?
Actually, that is a pretty appropriate schedule. And we are taking steps to make the design go as quickly as possible by eliminating some of the different steps as far as submittals. We're trying to streamline that process because we would like to get this done as quickly as possible. So yes, we are on the same page and working for that same goal.
That makes me feel better, Kathy. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
Councilmember Pavement.
Well, I just to dovetail on what Rick was saying, I wouldn't mind seeing green underneath the overpasses if that's at all possible. And that's it. I think I would concur. I think it makes a good presentation for our city. So I would say go forth. I like it.
Anyone else? Councilmember Lee.
I'm also really in favor of the design. I would just ask if there are any ways to, marginally improve it for lowering maintenance, knowing that Caltrans sometimes has trouble with maintenance ongoing, and also with an eye to minimizing graffiti and dumping. That those are the sort of the blemishes on our quality of life, and the visual aesthetic of the city that I think matter a lot to our residents. And so keeping that in the forefront of the design would be my only feedback.
Great. Councilmember Goethals? No, and I will just echo the comments we've heard. I mean, so many San Mateo residents and non-residents pass through this corridor, and I'm really excited for these trees to get to fully mature. And if they look anything like the mock-ups we're seeing, I think we're all in for a big treat. Thank you so much for all of your hard work on this. And I just wanted to make sure that you got everything you needed from us before I move on to the next item.
Yes, I believe so. Thank you very much for the comments. They're very helpful to guide us. And we look forward to bringing that into the design and providing some responses of how things go with Caltrans as well. So
excellent. Thank you. All right, we'll move on to,
let's see.
I just want to stop sharing screen.
Yeah, I got to figure out how to do that.
While she's figuring that out, the second item is Pavement Management and Smooth Streets Program. And we are going to have a presentation by Kathy Zammit, Engineering Manager.
Okay.
So Kathy, I already stopped sharing your screen, so
Okay.
you don't need to do that. You just want to share your next PowerPoint if you have one.
Okay, yes, I do. And let me see if I can figure out the best way to do this. Okay. Just trying to find the little share screen button. It's not, there it is, share screen. Okay.
There you go.
Okay. All right. Well, this presentation is about our pavement management plan or program and our smooth streets programs. This presentation is going to give you an update with a brief overview of the pavement management strategies, current program status, and some options for future funding scenarios. And since we do have limited time this evening, I am going to be going through some of the overview slides quickly, but there will be opportunity at the end to revisit them if desired. So when we look at San Mateo's pavement assets, it consists of 203 miles of streets, of which approximately 2/3 are designated residential and 1/3 are collectors and arterials. The Pavement Condition Index, or PCI, something that you hear about, this is a metric that we use to describe the condition of a section of roadway using a numeric scale. This index ranges from 100, which represents new pavement, to 0, which represents a failed roadway at the end of its useful life. And these scores are based on the extent and type of defects within a segment of pavement through a visual inspection. The condition categories that you see here of very good, good, poor, and failed help to guide us in the selection of treatments methods which are appropriate for the type of roadway segment in that condition. The numeric limits that you see for these categories are not fixed, but they are something that we've established and we try to stick to, and they provide guidance as to when a more substantial treatment method might be required. And also want to point out that the PCI index is not a drivability index. It's supposed to represent the technical condition of the pavement. It's not representing a drivability condition. So a failed street doesn't mean it's undrivable. It means it's getting toward the end of its useful life. So this graph illustrates the rate of deterioration of pavement over time. And an arterial here in gray is more heavily used, and that's going to deteriorate more rapidly than a residential street, which may last longer. As the pavement becomes more deteriorated, it becomes more expensive to restore it. So for example, a maintenance treatment such as a crack seal or slurry sealing are appropriate treatments for the pavement that's in the very good PCI range, and it's much less expensive than once we start getting into the need for rehabilitation or reconstruction. So it is important to protect pavement early in its useful life using less costly treatments. So to further illustrate this point, I'd like to consider here an example of a representative arterial street. If a street does not receive maintenance treatments and it's just left to deteriorate, it will become failed in about 15 years or so. And in that condition, it would cost approximately up to $5.4 million per mile to reconstruct that street to a new condition. Whereas if the pavement is maintained when it's life is still in this target zone for pavement rehabilitation. For example, if we treat it with a slurry seal while it's still in this upper category, you bring that not quite back to 100, but you bring it fairly close to 100. And so you've kind of restored it. And what that does is it increases the pavement life. It actually buys it more time and shifts that curve over. So what that does is make it cheaper to rehabilitate. And as it deteriorates again, if we catch it again while it's still in a good condition, and let's say this time we have to do a grind and pave, that might be on the order of $1.2 million a mile. But what this shows is that over the same time frame, instead of letting pavement deteriorate all the way to a failed condition and spend a large amount of money reconstructing it, in the same amount of time, if we keep funding our maintenance program, we can spend, for example, only $1.3 million to maintain that same segment of pavement. And the important thing here as well is that the pavement in that scenario has spent most of its life in the good or very good range, meaning that it's a nice street, it's in good condition. Whereas if we don't maintain and we just wait until it runs out its whole life, then you're going to end up with a good portion of that life being spent in an undesirable condition. So again, just illustrates that spending money on maintenance prolongs the pavement life, reduces the total cost spent over the same amount of time, and it keeps the road in a good or very good condition for a longer period of time. So this is a snapshot of our pavement system, our current condition. This shows the distribution of the number of miles of street by the PCI ranges, and we've color coded that so that it's a little easier to see. But I'd like to point out that our PCI average for the overall system is 70, but we have 86% of our streets in good and very good range. So that's 170 miles in the good categories and 33 miles that are starting to slip in condition. So there are two programs that are currently in active programs that we're using to address street pavement. And one is the Smooth Streets program, which is focused specifically on repairing failed streets. This is a program that was incepted in 2013. It helps support the council priority to eliminate failed streets. It's funded in part by the Measure US funds that were voted for this purpose. And at the time, there were 22 miles of failed streets, 17 were failed, and 5 miles were in an at-risk category, meaning they're poor and they're at risk of becoming failed if we don't do something with them. So since that time, we have either completed or currently have in construction 12 miles of those failed streets, completed 1 mile of the at-risk streets, and what's left is 5 miles of failed streets and 4 miles of at-risk streets. The total estimated cost at this time to finish the remaining program is $27 million, and our planned completion is by 2025. The other program is our ongoing annual pavement maintenance program, or PMP. And this is the program that goes on in perpetuity. This is the program which focuses on maintenance and rehabilitation of streets based on those management approaches and principles that I highlighted earlier. So the goals of this program are to optimize the use of funds so that we try to maintain the asset using the least expensive methods wherever possible, maintaining that network average PCI 70 or greater, and minimizing the failed streets inventory to the extent possible. When we planned these projects, there are many considerations that are part of that planning process. We utilize a software program called Street Saver, which was developed by the Metropolitan Transportation Commission to help local agencies manage their budgets and plan how they're going to spend their funding to keep these streets in good condition. We also look at other utility projects and capital projects throughout the city so that we can avoid, to the greatest extent possible, paving a street and then having it torn up within 3 years. We do have a 3-year moratorium, and we take that as part of our planning process. We also do consider pedestrian and bicycle improvement opportunities as we do these projects, particularly when it's something that can be implemented with striping. It's a great opportunity, and we're trying to do that as much as possible. We also take into consideration the usage of the streets. So sometimes there isn't enough funding to do everything. And if we're looking at a grouping of streets that maybe are in similar condition, and we need to refine the list further, then sometimes we look at things like the usage. You know, what's the best area for us to focus our funding on based on the usage of that street, and who is, how are we getting benefit from that one street versus another? We try to optimize in that way. So looking forward, I'd like to present some comparisons of funding strategies. And this is just a few scenarios to illustrate the potential outcomes from different levels of funding that we can put toward our program, and strategies over a 15-year planning horizon. And this is just to start illustrating some of the details of what happens when we spend different levels of money. So looking at this first scenario labeled current plan, and at the top is the current condition. I put that there for reference. So this is where we are right now. And if we look at current plan, what that involves would be completing the Smooth Streets program as we planned and as we've outlined, and continuing to fund our pavement management program at a level of approximately $4 to $4.5 million annually. And this level of funding has been kind of the target we've had for the last several years. But unfortunately, this level of funding is not enough to keep up with the maintenance and rehabilitation needed to prevent streets from becoming failed. So if we stick with that level of funding over time, eventually you're going to end up with a lower average PCI, and you're going to end up with a lot more failed streets. About 22 miles of failed streets is predicted. The next scenario is what we're calling eliminate failed streets. And so this scenario addresses what would it take to eliminate all the failed streets currently, bring all the streets to a condition of good or better, and then maintain all of those streets in a good or better condition going forward, meaning keep the PCI above 50. So in addition to the current 5-year funding plan, Smooth Streets program and PMP, the PMP budget would need to be increased to about $9.5 million annually after 2025. So while this approach requires increasing the annual PMP budget to approximately double what we have been budgeting in the past, this approach does make it less costly to maintain pavement in the future. And as you can see, if we make that commitment, we can end up with a fairly good system, high PCI, and try to eliminate those poor and fail streets and keep other ones from becoming poor and failed. The last scenario is labeled maintain average PCI above 70. This illustrates the estimated cost to maintain a system-wide average PCI greater than 70. And this requires a little lesser investment of approximately $7.5 million annually after 2025, but it does result in failed streets still accumulating at the end of that planning horizon. Albeit not as many, we're still looking at 7% failed streets by the end of that time. I've tried to describe the annual funding, but this is also to show you the totals of what we'd be spending over this horizon, because there is a variety there. So in summary, these scenarios are illustrating that if we do not increase our current annual budget and investment in pavement management, the overall condition of the system will continue to degrade and the cost of restoration will increase with time. So it is expensive to keep up with this once we have the system bring the whole system up to a good condition. It is more money to maintain it. So looking forward, we are on track to complete the Smooth Streets program, and we will continue the pavement management program to balance the maintenance and the rehabilitation to try to slow the deterioration of the overall street network and try to minimize the occurrence of failed streets. But the current investment, again, does not really prevent the continued creation of failed streets. So the intent here is to hopefully provide some information to council to help with establishing priorities and funding levels for these programs going forward. So with that, that's the end of my presentation, but I'm happy to receive questions and comments at this time and go back to any slides that you wish.
Great, thank you. I'll bring it back to council. If we have any questions, can you raise your hand? Council, Deputy Mayor Bonilla.
Hi, I was just wondering, we've been working on this for a number of years, and I know we did have, I just looked at the pages on the Public Works Department. There was a place there where you were able to find out when your street was expected to receive some sort of treatment, which I think is a good thing to know if you live on a street that's in the 50 or less. But I don't think I'm able to see that now on any of the pages related to the Smooth Streets program. Kathy, is that correct? Or is there a place where somebody, I think it was Shasta a while back, where people asked me, they wanted to see that, I was able to point out where they could see it, and clearly work got done there more than once. But anyway, what about that?
So that website was a little outdated, and so we're in the process of updating and redesigning our website to have better information. So that hopefully will be coming soon. But one of the challenges is that when we plan these projects, there are things that change as we go along. For example, sometimes we'll run into a street that we planned to do in 1 year, but we run into geotechnical issues during the design process. So we may need to change the schedule on that particular segment to allow time to do the research, figure out the appropriate solution. Sometimes there's utility relocations. And so we try to advance as many streets as possible and not let those get dragged down by ones that then take longer. So the concern is when we publish detailed information of a specific time, if we have to change it, that's a big disappointment to people. And we're trying to be as transparent as we can with the information and as accurate with the information. So we are working on a way to provide that. What I can show you.
I'm looking at a page right now that shows current active segments and lists 8 streets on the website. With regard to what you were just saying, Kathy, certainly some schedule is better than no schedule. Even if you list a warning there, say warning, all projects are subject to schedule change due to unforeseen conditions, right? And I think that people would have to accept that. Things change sometimes, but at least we have a schedule and they're on it, right?
And just to give you an idea, I know it's really hard to see on this screen and we can send this separately, but this is an example of the remaining street segments for the Smooth Streets program. And so this is the type of map that we could potentially publish to help show the locations of the projects.
Yeah, with a warning that subject to change, right?
Yes.
Unforeseen conditions, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good, thanks.
Councilmember Pavement.
So this is a huge subject for so many of our residents. So I'm glad we're taking it up tonight. And I thank you for your efforts, Kathy. I'm wondering if you could go back a couple slides. Let me go back one for sure. One more, please. So when I look at this presentation, what I see is the difference between eliminating failed streets and maintaining this average PCI is 18 million. But then if you go back a few slides, you told us that to repair 1 mile of a failed street is about 5 million, right? Somewhere around there, 5.5 million?
Yes, that is for a typical arterial street. So it's larger. I was trying to look at a 1 mile segment of a typical arterial street, which is kind of the most complicated ones to fix. So that is more of a cap. And depending on the type of treatment that we can use to fix the street, sometimes we try to plan for budgets that are considering reconstruction, but there have been streets where we've been able to repair them without having to dig up the entire street, and we do a thick overlay. And so that does help reduce the cost. So that's why those numbers are different, is because the one on the 5.4 million is kind of a cap, and this is more of an average.
Okay. Well, I think what I'm getting at is when I see the difference here between the eliminating failed streets and maintaining the average, there's a difference of $18 million, and that's over a 15-year period, right? From 2025 to 2040, is that what it is?
This would go through 2035.
Okay. So from now until then, okay. It just seems to me that you might be spending an extra 18 million, but you would be fixing, you'd be in a position where you'd have to fix maybe 3-4 miles of failed streets, and you'd eat that up pretty fast, the difference between the two. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think what's difficult, and we struggled on how to try to show this visually. What's difficult is that if you're putting in a certain amount of money every year, and you're putting that toward the overall maintenance of your system, and there are going to be some streets that you're not going to get to unless you're funding it at that optimal amount, which, ideally, if you eliminated all the failed streets, you brought everything up into a good or better condition, you're kind of starting with an almost new, not almost new, but a newer system in a sense. And so the maintenance cost of those are less, and you can keep them up. If you can keep them up, that's going to cost you less over time. But if you're funding it at less than that optimum, you're going to have more segments that are deteriorating and you're not getting to them. So the overall, you end up with more segments that are now in a more deteriorated condition. And so they're costing more. So it's the idea that it's not a one-to-one relationship with the money, because the money is getting you fewer miles repaired, because you're having to spend more on the same number of miles in order to fix them.
So spending $9 million a year, you're telling me may not quite get the numbers that you've depicted here?
Well, this scenario is basically, if we continue and do the Smooth Streets program as we've planned, and then we put 9.5 million annually, and the schedules of these projects would be, it's not always the same every year, but this is the annualized cost to do this, that it's predicted that we could bring the system into a much better condition, because we'd be kind of taking care of a lot of things before, like getting them all done at one time and getting them taken care of, so that then as we go forward, it costs less to maintain them. So it's a different approach.
But it's sort of that
it's not linear.
Saves 9. It's sort of that stitch in time saves 9 concept.
Yes.
As it applies to streets, fair to say?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Gothos.
Kathy, thank you so much for the presentation. My question has to do with the 4% failed streets and the 10% poor streets. That represents a current number of miles in the city of San Mateo. Do you have an estimate for what the number of miles of San Mateo that is?
Yes, and that goes back to, let me see if I can get back to the right. Oops, there it is. Well, this is the current condition. So this is showing the orange is what's represented by that, and the red. So that is 1320. It's
33
about
miles.
It's 33 miles total, and it looks like it's about let's see, 6, 7, and this is split. So it's kind of split between the two.
And those are tens of thousands of homeowners, tens of thousands of residents in San Mateo?
No, these are the number of center line miles of street. So
but the people who live on those streets represents thousands and thousands of people.
Yes, probably depending on how close together the houses are. Yes, it would.
And when was the last time that we spent any money at all on their streets?
That depends on the individual street.
But doesn't it follow from our policies over the last 40 years that we haven't spent any money at all on those streets because we've been focused on pavement condition index?
Well, the Smooth Streets program is the program that is focused on these streets, but it's starting with so far the Smooth Streets program was to address these types of streets. And at that time that program was incepted and planned out, there were 22 miles of streets that fell into that category. As we're fixing them, it's kind of like a Golden Gate Bridge analogy. As we're fixing them, more are becoming failed. Now, they're not becoming failed quite as quickly because we are getting caught up to a certain degree, but with the funding that we have right now for that program, it's focused on getting that first list done. And there are other streets that are continuing to degrade. So that's why looking at one of the option that I showed about eliminate failed streets means we would have to put more money into this overall combined program of smooth streets and pavement management to address those other ones that are starting to slip, so that we get everything up at the same time, or within some time frame, and then we're estimating what we think that would cost over that time period.
What I'm getting at is that there are streets that are currently failed, that were failed 10 years ago, that were failed 20 years ago, that were failed 40 years ago, that we haven't spent any money on in my lifetime.
Well, I believe that the 22 miles that was, the 17 and 5 miles that was identified in 2013 was my understanding is that was the inventory at that time. So the program is focused on all the streets that were failed at that time. The streets that, and again, this is just an aggregate of the number of miles of streets. It's not necessarily the same streets. So these are streets that have become failed over this period of time. And so this is just where we are right now today, based on the recent inspections that we did about 3 or 4 months ago, where we went out and inspected all the streets and recalculated the PCI. So this is the most current data we have as a snapshot, but it does not mean that those are the same streets.
So that would be very interesting to me to find out if they are not overlapping. But when I was on the Public Works Commission, and when we started planning Measure S with this sole purpose in mind to it was my understanding that those failed streets that existed at that time had existed for a very long time. And that any federal money that we received, we weren't even allowed to spend on failed streets, which was why we needed a separate pot of money. And so it's my understanding that the failed streets that we still have that were failed a few years ago have been failed for a very long time, and that those residents have been living with a failed street for the entire time that they probably owned their homes. And if that understanding is wrong, then I want to know that. But based on the policies that we've had in trying to maintain a pavement condition index of at least 70, and based on the amounts of money that we received from the federal government that we were not allowed to spend on failed streets, I don't see how, other than the money we've spent from Measure S in the last few years, how we have changed which streets are failed. It's the same failed streets.
Well, I think maybe what we can do is provide either a listing or a map of some type to show all the streets that have been fixed under the Smooth Streets program. And like
they would not be in this category to the left. Those they're probably all the way on the right.
Well, the ones that have already been fixed will be on the right-hand side. The few remaining ones that I talked about on, let's see, I think it's, so these streets here, so these 5 miles of failed streets that are still remaining to be finished from the original program list, those are going to be in here. Okay. So basically, if we have five left, you're looking at 2, I'd have to see what the split is here, but you're looking at 2 to, let's say, 5 new streets that have become new miles of streets that have become failed in that time frame. So it is a slower rate, if you will. But yes, those streets are accounted for in here, and they will get fixed and move up into this green category. But what I'm saying is that these ones in the orange, we have certain streets on our list in our Smooth Streets program. So again, kind of toggling back and forth. So we've got 5 and 4. So that means that we're targeting 5 miles that's in here and 4 miles that's in here. And we will fix those and they will move up into the green category. But at the same time, because we don't have enough money to be able to take care of everything that's basically below 90, it means that some of these are going to continue to deteriorate. They're going to continue to slouch down this path. And so they will be added, they will eventually get into that failed category. So the Smooth Streets program is doing a lot to address all those streets that were failed in 2013, bringing them up in a good category, but there's still not enough money in the overall ongoing program to then keep the rest of the segments from continuing to degrade. And so that's kind of the overall point of this, is that unfortunately, unless you're spending a high level, the amount of money that needs to be spent in order to not have any deferred maintenance, basically, you are going to not be able to fix everything because you're going to be spreading your money. I mean, when we do the pavement management program, a little bit does go to the at-risk streets. In fact, this last year, we tried to put more toward the at-risk streets to see if we could get even more caught up. But then that means that maybe some of these green ones become yellow. So it's a balancing act to try to average out and try to keep these up. So that
was the only clarification I had. And Kathy, I really appreciate the nuance of your response. No, your response is perfect, and I understand it. And I do understand your request for more money in order to get to where we want to go. So thank you very much for your responses to my question. I hope my clarification was helpful. Thank you.
Okay, we we just a quick time check. We have about 15 minutes. We still got to take public comment. Looks like we have one, and we have another item. So if there are not any further questions, I'd like to open up public comment.
Yes, so Adam Lorraine, I've allowed you to talk. And Kathy, I need to stop your presentation.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, City Clerk, and good evening, Council and staff. Adam Lorraine, I am a Sustainability and Infrastructure Commissioner, but I'm speaking as a private resident who happens to enjoy sustainability and infrastructure tonight. I would like to thank Public Works for this presentation, very well timed after a recent discussion of Public Works projects that have been identified to council and of course projects from other departments as well. Very informative. As a resident and taxpayer, I can see the value proposition of smooth streets. And I support smooth streets for that reason. And I would be inclined to support more money toward the pavement management program in the future post smooth streets for the same reason. It seems pretty clear to me that this is a long-term investment, not just in our streets, but really in our in the value we get from the funds we can allocate toward maintaining these streets. So it's kind of a win-win where it appears to me from the presentation that the city are saving money in the long run by continuing to maintain our streets at a higher level. It also seems to be diminishing returns if we were to discuss removing funds from this program to put to other projects or initiatives. We would end up costing ourselves money in the long run by doing that. And so we get less bang for our buck overall, perhaps, if we do this. And, so I'm inclined to lean, in an ideal world, I imagine we would pursue the middle option Kathy presented with trying to fix all failed streets. For that reason, if we had the available funding, it would also help us avoid having to consider another smooth streets program, for example, and find ourselves in a position where we need to put, an extra large amount of money toward fixing an issue that may have gone out of control. That said, with my last minute, we've had a number of cyclists and people interested in bike ped infrastructure and how to fund it, ask questions about where we can get the funding. And I imagine if they are to see this presentation tonight, they might be a bit disheartened because not only have we as a city kind of committed funds that could have gone to bike ped to this program already through Smooth Streets for a number of years, but we're now talking about potentially adding more money that possibly could have gone to these projects to maintaining our streets. And while I think that might be okay, I guess my only question and request to the council is that we take a look at how we're doing overall with the grants and everything else we're trying to do to fulfill the bike master plan and keep an eye on this in the years to come. And if it turns out we're not getting enough progress done on that, please reconsider another alternative. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any more?
We have no other speakers.
Okay, I will close public comment, bring it back to council for some quick comments. Deputy Mayor Bonilla. You're on mute, Britt.
Sorry very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do support adding more money to get the streets into better overall condition. Hey, I have a question. While we're improving these streets and repaving and so forth, are we adding to them the necessary, per our bicycle and pedestrian master plan, the necessary facilities to accommodate bicycle and pedestrians? That's a question for you, Kathy.
Yes, as I mentioned, we do look at which streets are in the PED Bike Master Plan, and if we are working on one of those streets, we try to incorporate those improvements. And the ones that are accomplished with striping are the easiest to do, but sometimes there are other features, and we do try to accomplish those wherever we can.
Okay, good, thanks. So I think that's an important thing because when I was a member of the Bay Meadows and Transportation Corridor CAC back in 2001 is when we started about moving people to alternative modes of transportation. And then, of course, we did our bike and ped master plans in like 2011, 2012. So it's been many years. There's lots of anticipation. Bicyclists are sitting on the edge of their seats and they need funding. So I would like to encourage us to also, Kathy, bring a presentation on when we're going to be able to actually, or what the next steps need to be. We need a plan. Like I said, we need a map for people to know, a schedule, when they can get their streets done. Bicyclists also need to know more than they currently know. It's hard for them to find the information they need. I'm going to start helping them because I agree with them. This needs to get done. This program is equally very, very important to motorists. I mean, I've been looking at on Rand Street between Shoreview and Dakota, and on Idaho between Tilton and Second, I think, or Cypress. It's just like pieces of pavement lying there. It's just absolutely horrible. On the web page for the Smooth Streets plan, I see a picture of South Idaho between 4th and 7th that was redone compared to its old condition. It looks beautiful. So thank you for the work we're getting done. But I really encourage us to, yes, we need to do some creative funding, move the money where it needs to be, get more of this done, and include bike and ped facilities while we're doing it. Thank you.
Anyone else? I'm not seeing
Myself.
Please go ahead, Councilmember.
Just a couple quick ones. I think that there are a lot of calls for better GIS access so that people understand where the investments have been made and where it's geographically dispersed. And I think that one thing that would be really helpful in making a decision about a future investment is doing an overlay to better understand where there are opportunities to do the rapid implementation for bike and pedestrian master planning. If we don't have that, it's really hard to look at the disproportionate investment in smooth streets and not tell the story of how that actually helps accomplish our bike and ped goals. So for me, that's a really important point. And then the last point is, I think from a budget standpoint, looking at the 5-year long-term maintenance costs doesn't tell the story of the next, or the 15-year long-term maintenance cost doesn't tell the story of the next 15 years of cost savings and what the differentials are in the potential elimination plan versus staying the course of where we are. So I would like to see a longer term comparative analysis in terms of, if we make this upfront investment, what are the long-term savings over the next 15 years? So we're looking at a 30-year timeline. That to me would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Goethals.
I agree with Councilmember Lee and Councilmember Bonilla. My direct feedback on this item is that I support the investment in eliminating failed streets. And Kathy, is there any way next time you could make sure that Jeff Tarantino has to give part of the presentation? Thank you.
Councilmember Pavement.
Yeah, I mean, I think the general theme that you're hearing from all of us is let's get the most bang for our buck. And oftentimes that does mean repairing failed streets because in the long run, you don't end up spending as much money. So I think that's kind of, what you're hearing from all of us is truly, as Mr. Lorraine said, the most bang for our buck is really where we're after it. And if we can take the opportunity when we're doing the streets to enhance the bike and pedestrian master plans, that's another way to get the most bang for your buck. Thanks, Kathy. Great work.
I concur with my fellow council members. And in the interest of time, I will withhold the rest of my comments. The one thing I would like to say is in the future, this is just my preference, if we could maybe have a little, especially that first presentation, a little bit shorter, so we could have a little bit more time to ask our questions and to give our comments, that would be helpful for me at least. Okay, so we're gonna close out this item and move to closed session. Before we do, anybody is welcome to provide public comment on the closed session item? And
there are no
not seeing
speakers.
anybody. Okay, so we're going to move over to Teams, and then we got our meeting at 7. So I'll see everyone there. Thanks.